Cat Days by Griffin Rose on AO3. Episode 25, Chapter 4. Hey brother. Izuku and Todoroki often helped Shinso with his training. Usually it was a day he wasn't already training with Shouta, so they'd stuck with quirkless sparring. Izuku technically resigned supreme in these matches, having grown up with Shouta teaching him. Todoroki relied too much on his quirk and his distance, so he was at a disadvantage with someone who got up close. Shinso actually fared better, relying on cheap tricks and sappy street fighting moves. But there were some days Shouta wanted Shinso to practice with his quirk, so he called in Izuku and Todoroki. This was the first chance Shinso had ever really had to play around with his quirk, and test the limitations, like how long he could hold someone under and how many commands he could give them at once. Today, Shouta wanted Todoroki and Izuku to fight against the brainwashing. Shinso's targets wouldn't always be willing participants after all. They agreed readily enough, and took up positions across from Shinso. "Didn't this give you a massive grinding last time?" Todoroki asked. "Only when I tried to morph," Izuku said. "I just won't morph now." He learned his lesson. Satisfied with his answer, Todoroki nodded. It was an easy-going situation to avoid. Except the point of this today was that they needed to fight Shinso's hold. Izuku forgot what it had felt like to not be willingly in his control. Shinso instructed them both to do jumping jacks, and Todoroki rushed to obey. Izuku twitched, half his muscles attempting to obey, the other half knowing that they couldn't. It made a weird disconnect in his mind, and he could feel the headache coming. "I said do jumping jacks." Shinso pushed harder. His hands flared, but his feet stayed planted. This wasn't any harder than forcing himself to stay on target when he morphed into something with a terrible attention span, which was, honestly, most of his animals. "Jump," Shinso ordered. His knees bent, but Izuku refused to jump and ended up crashing onto them. Beside them, Todoroki kept doing jumping jabs, but they were a lot less graceful than when they started. With Shinso's divided attention, it gave him more of a chance to break free. "Stand up," Shinso ordered. The fog in Izuku's mind pressed around him. His instincts when he couldn't focus was to shift into a form that could. But he couldn't do that here. He knew he couldn't. It would only end badly. He promised he wouldn't try to shift to get out of this. Shinso stepped forward and glaring at him. "I said stand up." The frog pressed around him. It derailed his train of thought and completely obliterated the tracks. It was instincts when he couldn't focus and morph into something that he could. He shouldn't morph here. He knew it wouldn't end well, but it was an instinct, and he couldn't think. He morphed, or at least he tried to. Like the sports festival, the pain stopped in halfway, and he stepped back to human form. The fog from the brainwashing was gone, but there was a haze of pain that clouded his thoughts now, and he didn't have the adrenaline from the festival to push it away this time. Hands were all over him, different voices calling his name. He blindly reached for the ones that meant safety and home, hands scrabbling through the air until a familiar callous hands caught it and held on. "I'm right here, Izu. You're okay." Izuku whimpered in pure disagreement of that. He was not okay. He was so far from okay if it wasn't even funny. His head felt like someone lit it on fire, and his brain on fire and then started dribbling it like a basketball. Strong arms pulled him against their chest. Izuku curled against it, breathing in Shota's comforting coffee-scented caramel scent. Shouta continued speaking to him, but Izuku couldn't process any of the words. He hoped they weren't important. Watching Shinso's quirk affect Todoroki and Izuku at the same time was truly something. Right from the start, it was obvious that the grip wasn't as tight on Izuku. Todoroki tensed up with the brainwashing. Izuku should have no chance when he was pulled under. The only sign had been the vacant look on his face. It was nothing more than sheer dumb luck that made Izuku partially immune to Shinso's quirk. But Shouta couldn't help but pride swell in him as Izuku fought the command Todoroki obeyed so easily. He let Shinso keep pushing at Izuku. Shinso needed the practice, and it was foolish to think that there wouldn't be villains who would fight it off as well as Izuku. Ideally, in a real fight, Shinso would be able to capture and restrain a villain just by holding them like this. But today wasn't about capture. It was about practice. They did enough capture practice with the capture weapon the rest of the time. But it wasn't an easy weapon to master, and Shouta suggested Quirk practice to give Shinso and his confidence a break. Shinso pushed harder, stepping forward like the proximity would help his Quirk. Maybe it did. They'd have to test that somehow. Izuku was on his knees. The blank look on his face was somewhat disturbing. Izuku was never emotionless. Then he started morphing. It was always bizarre to watch his morphing straight on. Usually Izuku was quick enough that the mind didn't process what it was actually seeing, especially if you weren't paying attention. Even when you were, you'd get glimpses of the in-between stages, maybe an elongated neck or patches of green spreading over him, but you didn't get the full picture. Now, Izuku choked halfway through. He'd shrunken to maybe half his size, fur sprouting from his cheeks, fingers melted into paws, and when the process suddenly reversed, he was fully human again. Human again, and screaming, clutching at his head as he curled into the fetal position on the floor. Midoriya! Both teens yelled, Shinso stepping back horrified, and Todoroki free from the brainwashing. It looked like stepping forward, dropped beside Izuku, and pulling a hand on his back. Shouta was already next to them, calling for Izuku. His son had stopped screaming at least, but the sobbing wasn't any easier to hear. It's okay. Izuku, you're gonna be okay. He said he wouldn't morph. Todoroki whispered, trembling beside them. He knew this would happen? Shouta demanded. Izuku had told him that he had a headache after their match at the sports festival. This was not the simple little headache he was led to believe. Izuku reached a hand out, flailing blindly through the air. Shouta grasped it. He had always grabbed this hand. I'm right here, Izuku. You're okay. Izuku squeezed his hand with everything he had. God, he sounded like he was in so much pain. I'm sorry. Shinso gasped out. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Ah, great. He had a guilty student to deal with on top of his injured son. This isn't your fault, Shouta stated. I kept pushing him. Shinso said. I shouldn't have pushed so hard. You did what I told you to do, Shouta said. You're not at fault here. It was his job as the teacher to make sure everyone was safe, and if Izuku and Todoroki knew one of them was not safe, then they were the ones responsible for saying something. Hopefully, they'll learn their lesson. Todoroki was close to panicking, biting his lip with wide eyes. He might not be the one sobbing in pain, but he did have to watch his friend suffer. That was sometimes even more effective. Shouta carefully lifted Izuku into his arms. Izuku had always been on the smaller side, and Shouta didn't feel the physical weight right now. The sobs tapered off, and Izuku curled into him, pressing his face against Shota's chest and breathing deeply. May he find whatever comfort he could right now. I'm taking to a Kirby girl. Practice is obviously over. He pushed himself to his feet and made a beeline to the doors. Izuku whimpered at all the movements, and the sound went straight to Shota's chest and squeezed. I've got you, Izu. I promise. I'm not going anywhere. He kept up the liberty of smooth placades. The more he talked, the more Izuku seemed to calm down, though he still didn't open his eyes, and his face was still scrunched in pain. He didn't run to Recovery Girl's office. He wouldn't risk dropping Izuku like that. But he did power walk, and he must have had his scary glare, as Hisashi called it, because the few people that had passed by leaped out of his way. She was still treating a third-year hero student. Thankfully, otherwise he might have missed her at this point of day. Aizawa, what? Oh, dear. Set him on the bed. She dropped the bandage she was unwrapping from the third year and rotated her school to the next bed, where Shouta diligently placed Izuku. Or tried to place him. Might be the better phrase. Izuku wouldn't let go of his shirt, and Shouta didn't have the heart to make him. He ended up on the bed with Izuku in his lap. As quick as he could, he explained what happened with Shinso. Recovery Girl sighed. Yes, this happened last time too. She pecked his cheek. The effects were immediate. Izuku's face relaxed, and he risked opening an eye. Dad? Right here. Shouta whispered. What have I told you about scaring me like that, huh? The smile was weak at best. but any kind of smile was better than that awful look of pain. Sorry, I wasn't going to morph. Honestly, it's just hard to think like that. I couldn't stop. He accepted that explanation for now. They could discuss in detail later, when his son didn't have a migraine. Recovery Girl offered some pain meds and told Izuku to sleep it off before going back to the third year. Can I take him home? Shouta asked. That'll be fine, Recovery Girl assured him. I recommend not morphing for a day at least. No arguments here, Izuku murmured. Shouta took a deep breath, calming down from the adrenaline rush. Izuku was okay. Potentially grounded for not telling Shouta vital information about Shinso's quirk on him, but okay. He texted Sashi to meet him at the car with their stuff. Izuku rode on his back this time, face tucked into Shota's neck, and away from all the lights. And they swung by the gym again to pick up Izuku's bag. Todoroki and Shinso had cleaned up as much as they could, leaving Izuku's bag by the door for them to grab. Shouta shut off the lights and locked up, grabbed Izuku's bag, and then went to the car. Sashi met them there a few minutes later, carrying his and Shota's bag and frowning. What happened? He asked. Quirk accident, Shouta said. Left Izuku with a killer migraine. Hisashi hummed in symphony, and lightly ruffled Izuku's hair. Izuku leaned into it. He finally unlocked the car then, and Shouta climbed into the back seat with Izuku so his son could continue to curl up against him. It put his own mind at ease after watching him drop earlier. Hisashi didn't look surprised, and he turned the radio off and stifled through the silence so they wouldn't aggravate Izuku's headache. The kid was half asleep on him, and Shouta ran his hand through his hair. When they made it home, he carried Izuku to their apartment again. Izuku, sleepily draped over his back, didn't protest. Thankfully, Izuku's bed was more nest than actual bed, so it was easy enough to slip him off and tuck him in. Izuku stirred long enough to find the Eraserhead plush Namori custom ordered for him, and then buried his face under a pillow. Shouta ruffled the kid's hair fondly. He'd love to stay all night, but he still had to work and patrol later, on top of that. Situations like this was why Namori had gotten that plush for Izuku, so that when he physically couldn't be there because of work, Izuku could still hold on to him. I'll be in the living room if you need me. Thanks, Dad, Izuku whispered. Love you. Love you too, kiddo. He managed to keep the cats from getting in and shut Izuku's door, just so that whatever noise he and Hisashi made wouldn't bother him. Then he slumped over the kitchen table, where Hisashi had already started grading. Shouta was so glad he had never assigned this kind of work. The benefit of teaching heroics was that it was all performance-based, so all of his gradings technically happened during class. The downside was that his class prep couldn't be done too far in advance. He had to constantly change things based on how his students were progressing or address problems he noticed. He took notes during class, but he made more in-depth summaries afterwards. And that was what he focused on while Hisashi graded his ridiculous amount of homework assignments. They had left over for dinner, and he poked his head into Izuku's room to find him sound asleep. He left him sleeping and shut the door again. The next time he checked was right before patrol. Izuku stirred a little and slumped his way through wishing him luck, flopping back down onto his pillows. Smiling to himself, Shouta went on his patrol. The migraine didn't ease until late at night. By then, Shouta had gone on patrol, and Izuku had slept so much, he knew he'd essentially screwed up his sleep schedule for the next week. When he got up, he changed out of his gym uniform into his actual pajamas and ventured out of his room in search for dinner. The cats immediately swarmed him. He, understandably, drew animals to himself like a magnet. They were usually all over him while he was around. Hisashi was still up, watching TV when he came out. Hey, how are you feeling? Still a little headache, but it's bearable. That's good. Made up a plate of dinner for you in the fridge. Just needs to be reheated. Thanks, Sashi. They were just leftovers from the last few nights, but Izuku appreciated not having to dig it out of the fridge himself. Once, in Reheated, he joined Hisashi on the couch to watch whatever comedy he put on. Hisashi went to bed afterwards, and Izuku went into his room to attempt all the homework he still needed to finish. He also texted Todoroki and Shinso, even though it was late. On the off chance that they were up worrying about it, that should set their minds at ease. If not, they'll be happy to wake up and know he was okay. As expected, Todoroki didn't respond. Shinso did, though, almost immediately. He sent 5 texts in a row, all different forms of apologies and accusations. Izuku calmed him down as much as he could, but then demanded he try and get some sleep. Shinso, I barely sleep anyways. Don't worry about it. Midoriya, that's not healthy. You need sleep. Shinso, insomnia's a bitch like that. Midoriya, I'ma fight your insomnia. Shinso, that's not really necessary. But, thanks. Izuku smiled. He continued to text Shinso for another hour or so, working on his homework, just until Shouta came back from patrol. He wasn't surprised when his dad came in to check on him before anything else. He leaned against the doorway, taking a deep breath to settle himself before he pushed off to come hug Izuku. Izuku melted into the embrace. I'm sorry for scaring you. Why didn't you tell me this could happen with Shinso's quirk? I never would have asked you to help if I'd known. Izuku shrugged. I figured as long as I didn't morph, it would be fine. And I forgot I never brought it up specifically. You were at the sports festival, so... That wasn't fair to Shouta. Yes, he had been at the sports festival, but he also still been on a lot of painkillers. Shouta inhaled sharply. You really thought I would knew this could happen? And asked you to do it anyways? No, of course not. I thought the plan was to avoid it happening, so it didn't matter. Shouta shook his head. You potentially getting hurt always matters, kiddo. I know you want to help Shinso, but you're not doing it at your own expense, okay? Okay. Izuku wasn't exactly eager to repeat the painkiller headache. With that recovery girl, it would probably take him days to bounce back. Hell, it would probably take hours until he could probably even open his eyes. Shouta held onto him for another moment, before finally pulling away. You should try and get some more sleep so you don't mess up your schedule too bad. Izuku glanced at his homework. He hadn't touched his English or history yet, since he knew Hisashi and Nomori would give him as much time as he needed to make it up. Math and science was another matter. He almost finished his math homework, and truthfully, he wasn't sure he could concentrate on biology even if he wanted to. He didn't even entertain the idea of reading his literature assignment. One missed assignment isn't going to tank your grade, Shouta said. And you know ectoplasm and cementos will understand anyways. He knew that, but he still wanted to finish if he could. Shouta flipped the desk light and closed the textbook. Bedtime. Come on. Sighing, Izuku gave in. He went to brush his teeth while Shouta changed into his pajamas and got ready himself. He tried to curl up in his bed again, and he even let the cats in, but they weren't the body heat he was looking for right now. He'd always slept better with someone else around, and he snuck into his dad's room plenty of times over the years. Technically, he could do it as a cat, and Shouta wouldn't even know it was him, and not one of the other strays. Sometimes he thought Shouta knew anyways. He had to have at least guessed Izuku did it sometimes, even if he didn't notice when it happened. The green cat fur he left behind was a dead giveaway. Shouta never brought it up, though, meaning he didn't mind. Izuku couldn't be a cat tonight, and he was a little old to climb into his dad's bed to sleep, but he kind of didn't care. Shouta had barely settled into his own room when Izuku crept into his room. Snorting, Shouta wordlessly lifted an edge of his blanket. Izuku dove into it, curling up against his side. They both relaxed as the cats found their way in and claimed whatever spot they could find. Izuku settled into the familiar warmth and let himself drift off to sleep again. Wow, okay. Izuku, that's not healthy. I know that, Ah! Okay, sorry. I had to scream a little bit. But I know that you know, and you know that I know that you know that I know that I know you know. No? Yeah? You? Me? I? Okay, actual words this time. So, I know that this chapter is gonna have to deal with Shinso telling Izuku, and I wonder how that's gonna go. I know they had a cute little moment of like, haha, insomnia. Also, Izuku, I feel you. It is 2 a.m. I should be asleep, but I don't feel a wink of sleep because I fucked up my sleep schedule. I fucked it up. I'm gonna try to fix it by not sleeping. That's always works. Reset my sleep schedule by not sleeping. That's gonna work, right? No, it's not. Hopefully it works. I don't know. Or maybe I could try to force myself to sleep after I'm done recording. In like 2 hours. So like it's 4 a.m. I should wake up around 11. Oh, fuck. Who am I kidding? I'm not waking up. It's raining though, and I like the rain, so maybe I just won't fall asleep and I'll just write all day? I'll try to pull an all-nighter. I'll see what I can do. It's relatively hard sometimes. But I feel Izuku on that. Izuku having a big migraine. I don't have much notes. I'm just gonna end this here. As always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.